God of War Ascension, quite frankly one of the most forgotten entries in the franchise, and throughout this video you'll see exactly why. Released in 2013 after God of War 3, this prequel takes us back to before the trilogy, showing the consequences of Kratos' oath to Ares. This is part of my ongoing series where I platinum every God of War game, and after playing this game I can confidently say that it was an absolute mess. And somehow I still managed to get the platinum. For the first and last time in the franchise, for better or worse, definitely worse, Santa Monica decided to add a multiplayer mode into Ascension.
Why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
Who the fuck is that guy?
You are forced to pledge your allegiance to one of the gods. Each will grant a different combat ability, and I decided to pick Hades. From the tutorial alone, I could already tell that this mode felt rushed. It lacked the identity the games have already established, and doing all of these moves as anyone but Kratos does not hit the same. Luckily for me, the only trophy requirement here was finishing the tutorial. Also, if the idea of a multiplayer was not bad enough, I had to pay extra money just to get an online pass which would give me access to this game mode. I wanted to get some footage of the online mode, but the servers are very dead, which is to be expected as this game is older than the PS4. With that thankfully out of the way, let's see if the story is any better. But before we continue, if you enjoy Platinum Trophy videos like this, consider dropping a like and subscribing to the channel. It genuinely motivates me to keep improving these videos and pushing them out consistently. This was the only God of War game where I genuinely could not remember the story, which made me excited as it felt like a new experience. However, this excitement lasted all but 5 minutes as I realized forgetting it might have been a blessing. Firstly, chapter selecting a God of War game, it just feels so wrong. There is also a trophy for beating the game on hard mode, so of course I selected it and began the story. We begin with Kratos chained by his own blades, imprisoned by the Furies for breaking his oath to Ares. The first Fury you meet is the spider lady Megaera, who wastes no time taunting Kratos, which of course was not a very good idea. Breaking free from the chains here pops the prison break trophy. You chase Megaera through a prison built on the body of a Hecatochires, who has a name way too long for me, so we go with Heki going forward. And as much as I hate to admit this about a game I dislike, the combat feels really good. The grapple system is improved to let you do it from range, and new mechanics which let you throw hands with your enemies. Combining all these new features pops Unleashed. There is a big problem with this game however, there are no new weapons. In place of new weapons, Ascension decided to introduce these world weapons, which are temporary weapons you can pick up briefly. It was also time for the first boss, the Hand of Aegon. The fight itself was far from challenging, however the raw fight was against the camera angles. This fight made me feel nauseous. With the amount it was shaking and moving, pause. For the fight you mainly had to dodge his slam and slide attacks, eventually leading to the game's first quick time event kill where you can down this boss, popping another trophy. Following the fight you fall into the sewers for about 5 seconds as you are back outside in no time. Another hand just like the first boss appears, and you get another sequence where you are more so keeping up with the camera than the enemies. Here I managed to fill my rage meter and get 25 kills with the Rage of Gods. This mechanic works in tandem with your combos as hitting enemies builds it up and getting hit resets it. This pop tell me how you really feel. At this point I want to add that this game already felt extremely hard. Enemies are tanky and Kratos feels weak early on. The power creep in this game is almost non-existent, which makes regular encounters like these harder than most bosses. After this fight you can do this somewhat cringe slow motion jump to make it to the guardhouse and avoid being crushed by the hand. The Cyclops returns, who you can now mount once you have staggered it, which was actually a very fun mechanic and reminded me of the one Crash Bandicoot game on the PSP. Then came yet another hand. Here you can crush into the surrounding terrain before you perform a quick time event where you break its back, or in this case its wrist. We also learn more about Heki, who was the first victim of the Furies, and that Kratos was being mentally tormented by them, which was clearly worrying as they clearly had CIA level interrogation.
Put hummus up his ass?
Finally, some classic God of War. Kratos is surrounded by some baddies, who are unfortunately illusions. The Furies have magic which lets them manipulate reality, and this becomes the backbone of the story. This is of course not the extent of the powers, as Megaera reanimates Heki and you start yet another boss fight. My only question here was, how am I supposed to fight when the camera is in orbit? This game clearly discriminates against people with poor eyesight. The goal for this fight was firstly destroying these pincers around the arena, until yet another hand appears who you can then mount and turn against the boss, which ends with you feeding the hand to him and popping another trophy. As you finally catch up to Megaera, you can put down the first Fury, and just as the game was finally beginning to build some momentum, it decides to do a flashback. In this flashback, which takes place 3 weeks in the past, you are introduced to Orcos, who is the son of Ares and surprisingly an ally to Kratos. He is also the son of the Furies, which is how he helps you resist the illusions. Here you meet a new enemy named the Juggernaut, who you can stagger and complete a buttonless minigame for to pop open its head for the open-minded trophy. Throughout the game you will unlock new elemental magic for the Blades of Chaos. These include the Fire of Ares, which I just got, and the Ice of Poseidon, Lightning of Zeus, and the Soul of Hades. Instead of new weapons, this game decides to expand on the blades through these elements, which is a good feature. However, the new weapons in God of War games are usually my favourite part, so this was a big L in my eyes. During the tutorial fight with the Fire of Ares, I managed to spill 500 buckets of blood and pop the "that's gonna leave a mark" trophy. You eventually make it into this room with a roller crusher, which you have to stop by pulling blocks out of the wall. Once that was done, the round and round trophy popped. In the next area, you are trying to reach this temple. Here you will be traversing on these metal snakes whilst trying to unlock the bridge across. During all of this, you face the Chimera, who was a very tough fight considering the slow power creep in this game. After this fight, I used the red orbs I have been acquiring throughout the game to upgrade the Ice of Poseidon, which popped the Big Spender trophy. I also managed to find every world weapon available in the game and used it in combat, which earned me the Tools of the Trade trophy. The final section of this area sees you on a snake which will be constantly moving whilst you are fighting against enemies and destroying debris. There will be parts where you have to move without the snake, which makes for a rather cinematic section, at the end of which you pop Snake on a train. You arrive back at the tower where you fought the Chimera, this time having to fight yet another tough enemy, with the Manticore boss. This is a two-phase fight. Initially, the Manticore will have the ability to fly around the map or ground itself and fight you that way. The first quick time event will permanently ground the boss, and here you have to be very cautious as its attacks can game end you pretty quickly. The fight ends with you shoving its stinger in its mouth, popping hot lunch. You are now free to pull the lever on top of the tower, revealing the path to the temple. Inside, you are greeted by the house's friendly dog, the teleporting Cerberus, who is probably the toughest Cerberus across all God of War titles. The temple has a new mechanic where you have to inhale this green gas and turn decay in the environment. How that works is beyond me, but it is necessary to solve puzzles around here, and more importantly for another trophy. Up ahead you meet the caster, who has the same level of respect for his workers as Qatar. I am just joking, don't cancel me please. He is clearly not a good dude, but he does have the ability to use the powers of this temple without inhaling the vapor. This was of course something we wanted, so it was time to make our way around to him. As you circle your way around the temple, you eventually reach the room you saw the caster in, and here you can break the huge hourglass to lower the elevator in the middle to reach him. The caster is guarding the Oracle. He refuses to let you meet her. He also reveals to have this gross baby on his side called Pollux. He uses the magic to make himself younger, which begins the boss fight. This is one of the more interesting fights in the game, as he uses the aging and decaying magic to impact not only his combat but also the arena. This makes for some interesting parts where you have to dodge him decaying the entire floor and breaking pillars he will teleport to. You also knock him out at some point, which is when Pollux tags in and fights in his place. This is pretty much more of the same until Caster wakes up and decides to drop the Oracle. What a sore loser. His punishment was having his little tumor ripped off the side, subsequently ending the fight and popping a trophy. For this fight you gained the Amulet of Ouroboros, allowing you to use the decaying magic from the temple, but also healing magic which will restore the environment. This continues to play a part in solving puzzles, but also as a combat mechanic where you can slow enemies. The Oracle is somehow still alive, and speaking to her reveals that she would be a pretty bad therapist, as her advice was essentially kill the Furies as they are what is haunting you. Solid advice. The puzzles were very impressive in this game, especially having come off Chains of Olympus with probably the worst puzzles in the franchise. Solving this water wheel puzzle with the amulet you just got pops the Handyman trophy. You meet with Orcos once more at the harbour. Here he reveals he is tied to the Furies, and as you board the ship, the timeline shifts once more, taking you back to the present. You encounter a quite frankly gross puzzle. You have to use this dead guy to hold up this block, but what is worse is if you jump on the block after this, you will rip his arms off, popping a trophy. You can now reverse your cruel actions and give him his arms back, this time completing the puzzle and moving ahead to meet Tisiphone, who is another Fury. She is the one conjuring all the illusions, and as she runs away from you, more flashbacks. The boat you took arrives at Delos Landing, where you can see a destroyed statue of Apollo. Also, the ship you took gets devastated by these tentacles, which is totally not foreshadowing anything. In this area, I finally finished 2 collectible trophies. The first being finding the final Gorgon Eye for the I Have It trophy, and not long after this, the final Phoenix Feather for another trophy. For some odd reason, Santa Monica were obsessed with combo related trophies, so of course this game has one. The funny thing with this one specifically is that it is basically impossible unless you farm it using this rock. What's worse is that I had to get 1,000 hits. By the end of this, my square button had more mileage than a car. Using the amulet, I have been restoring these decayed chests, and once I found the final one and restored it, I got a little scared as the PS3 trophies have a little delay to them, but here I popped another trophy. Up until now I have been spamming the amulet in combat. This was all for a trophy which requires slowing 100 enemies. Also, using the club, one of the world weapons, I knocked a harpy out of the arena, popping the swinger trophy. Moving up, you eventually reach the gauntlet of Apollo, and let me run a little, okay? The reason I referred to this game as a complete mess earlier is mainly due to the non-linear storytelling it attempts. This could have been a standard chronological telling of Kratos and his fight against the Furies, which would have resulted in a far more coherent timeline. Instead, you get a form of storytelling which adds nothing and simply impacts your engagement in the story. All I got from this game was kill the Furies. It makes it hard for me to make a video which not only covers the trophies but also the story when there is none to begin with. Okay, run over. In this area you encounter an utterly brutal double fight against Megaera and Tisiphone, which is probably the hardest fight in the game, especially on hard mode. During this fight you have to focus on damaging Megara until she becomes slowed, where you can divert your attention to the second sister of the Timu Phoenix. Eventually you win in this encounter, so much so that you would think Tisiphone was dead, but as we know this is still a flashback. This is when Alecto appears, the third Fury, who incapacitates you with a sticky substance. This is when your absolute bro Orcos appears and rescues you from the Furies. He even comes with a gift as he gives you the Oath Stone. This is also where you pop the Bros Before Foes trophy. The Oath Stone is similar to the amulet as it becomes a part in solving puzzles, as you can create substitutions to either hold levers or weigh down pressure plates. The first instance this becomes incredibly useful is where you need to reach the top of this elevator without being hit by the flames. With the use of the Oath Stone you can weigh down the pressure plates and focus on the enemies, at the end of which you pop Fireproof. It also has a use in combat as it summons a clone to stomp around. Doing this 10 times pops Hello Friend. In this area ahead you are attempting to restore the statue of Apollo, during which I managed to get the second Oath Stone trophy for hitting 100 enemies using the ability. This is also an area with a semi-missable trophy, where you have to complete this slide without dying once, which I of course failed, but luckily this can be done through chapter select later on. You can now fully restore the statue, which pulls the lantern it is holding out of the water. This is the next destination, so I imagine that being quite useful. Before that however, you have to go inside the statue's head. Inside of here I struggled with some basic enemies once more. Seriously, whoever rated this platinum a 4 out of 10 was lying. The puzzle here was projecting the light into the two eyes of the statue, which will now project the light onto the lantern, that you make your way across to on a bloody manticore. This of course meant you had to now dispose of it. This is a repeat of the boss fight, except you are now in the second phase from the start. Seeing as this is close to the end of the game, a boss who appeared much early on was not much of an issue. Inside of the lantern you find the Eyes of Truth. These let you see beyond the illusions of the Furies. Not only that, but they also belong to the lover of Orcos, who says that they were taken from her after they saw a future where the God of War destroys Olympus. The Furies and Ares of course assumed this was about him, so they took them from her to prevent Olympus taking him down. Little did they know, a certain Boldy with tattoos will go on to fulfill that prophecy instead. You can't grab these just yet, instead you can head through this portal to a brutal part of the game, the Trial of Archimedes. On this side of the portal you can grab the Eyes of Truth, which pop the fully loaded trophy. The trophy is actually for fully upgrading everything, but seeing as I have already done that, and this came fully upgraded, the trophy pop. The eyes let you see past the illusions of the Furies. Using this ability for the first time pops Blind Justice. Now, as for the trial itself, you will be faced with 3 waves of enemies with no checkpoints in between, as I found out firsthand when I died on the last wave. The enemies you face here will be some of the toughest you faced from across the game, including Gorgons, Atalos and Wraiths. When I died to the Wraiths on the final wave, I crashed out a little bit, but eventually cleared the trial and popped next time use the stairs. When you return to the other side of the portal, you can pick up the final artifact, which was another collectible I've been picking up since the start of the game. The final one pops another trophy. Seeing as this was still in the flashback, it surely could not end here, and as Kratos gets jumped by the Furies once more, the game attempts a half-assed explanation as to why Kratos did not have the amulet or Oathstone in the present, and how he ended up bound by his blades at the start of the game. You now go back to the present for the 3rd time, and my only thought being that this game has somehow outdone The Last of Us 2 in stupid timeline jumping. In the present, you can chase after Tisiphone, who ran into a chamber where Kratos is shown an illusion of his family. And as the Furies revealed themselves, they try to bargain with the Spartan that he can have all of this if he chooses to. This of course does not happen, as we get like 6 games of Kratos killing gods after this, so instead we get the final boss fight. Here Alecto reveals herself to be the tentacle monster from the flashback. As I said, it was foreshadowing something. This is a multi-phase fight, as it begins on a boat where you are fighting against Tisiphone. This leads to a second boat where you are now fighting against Alecto, who will slam her tentacles on you. This is of course not the end, however you can blow up one of her tentacles and do some damage to her head. This leads to the final phase where the monster has revealed itself, and honestly Ares, what were you thinking hitting this my guy? This fight has a short tag team as Tisiphone appears, and here you should focus on her until she flies off, where you can now target Alecto. Kratos kills Tisiphone for real this time, and then quite brutally ends Alecto. This of course meant he was finally free. Or not. Here Orcos reveals that Kratos must kill him to sever his oath to Ares completely. Kratos rarely has allies, let alone friends, so this made for a rather emotional ending to an otherwise emotionless story. After killing him, you are shown Kratos burning his home down and setting off on his journey, which leads to the events of the original God of War, which you can watch the video for on my channel. During these cutscenes, 2 more trophies pop. One broken for completing the game, and Legendary Warrior for completing it on hard difficulty.
I'm not finished.
I now had a short cleanup for 2 more trophies via chapter select. The first for keeping the rage meter filled for over 2 minutes, which I got in chapter 1, as you can keep hitting these parasite enemies until the trophy pops. The second being the one I mentioned already. During chapter 24 you have to make your way down the slide without dying. If you fail you have to replay the entire chapter from the start. Luckily I successfully made my way down this time around and popped the looped up trophy. And finally, Champion of the Gods. Ascension isn't terrible, the combat is strong, the elemental system is unique, and the puzzles are some of the strongest in the series. However, being a God of War game, the standard is high. And with a story which had awful pacing, flashbacks, and an inconsistent power creep, it made everything feel disjointed, and to quote myself, a complete mess. Especially when compared to other Greek saga games. But at the end of the day, it was another platinum, bringing me closer to completing this challenge. If you enjoyed this one, let me know your favourite God of War game in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.